So there's that. Now you sent me a video link to a young man. Oh, we won't mention his name now, but he had objected to the methods. He had three objections to the methods I use, not the methodology. I always tell my students, talk about methods. Methodology is the study of method, but I'm talking about the actual method I use. Like John Crossan has a method. Dale Allison has a method. Paula Fridgerson has a method. On and on. Bart Ehrman has a method. How do you approach these documents? What are your presuppositions? What are your ideas? And everything from being accused of, oh, you just pick and choose. And this particular gentleman, and I have nothing at all against him. In fact, I want to do a show with you where we'll play some clips, not to like put him down or anything, but he raises really good points that people, you have to understand the method I'm using with these gospels, which I call careful. Some people call it critical. I call it careful. So when I teach Mark, forget the others even exist. Now, along the way, I point out, now notice what Matthew does with this. He just takes it out, and Luke just takes it out, and so forth. I'm assuming these guys are conscious, right? They're not zombies. And so when they look at Mark in front of them and they have other traditions, okay, yes, of course they do. And they want to add them. But sometimes they want to add them because they don't like the point Mark's making. Like, get behind me, Satan, to Peter. Luke just takes that out. Now that's conscious. How do I know it's conscious? Am I in his head? Yes. How am I in Luke's head? Because I've compared every single time in Mark when Peter's mentioned and how he treats Peter. And so that's how I know. In other words, I'm being careful. I'm not just shooting from the hip like, oh, Tabor likes this. And he says this is in and this is out and this is up and this is down. That's not how I work. And if I did work like that, please, do more critiques. But I always welcome critiques. I want to do a show with you in the future, Derek. I've been writing this down, 4 or 5 ways that I've changed my mind on things, which I hope is to my credit. If I've been studying this stuff and teaching it for 4 decades, I hope I've changed on something.
Yeah.
I mean, could I use my notes from the 70s and not, here's my notes for the Mark course. I keep adapting and adopting and learning and so forth. So as much as the content, I want to show people the way many of us study and how we go about. Another thing we can do, and this isn't a course, Derek, but I really want to do this method thing for all of your people. It's just so important. And what we could do in the future too is talk about how my method is, say, different from Bart Ehrman or Dale Allison, and then why, or Crossan, naming some of the major people that have written on Jesus, and then why, and that's why we come out with different conclusions. You see, because well, you guys can't agree on anything. Well, let's figure out why we can't. What their presuppositions, Bob
I wouldn't
Price
say
and
you can't agree on anything. I think
no, we actually
overall, for
agree
the
on
most part, you
core.
do agree. Yeah.
But you know how people say, oh, those scholars, they think they've got it all down. They're reading it historically and they don't even agree. Is there an empty tomb? Is there not an empty tomb?
Right.
This and that. But so
the problem with that is I find some of the more conservative types that are arguing this, they'll say stuff like, well, the documentary hypothesis and the supplementary hypothesis, and they can't agree on anything. And it's like, actually, I've spoken to both sides. They do agree that there are multiple sources from different voices that are taking place. The one thing they do agree on is that this is not one author writing all of this material as if they're all saying the same thing. So that's the thing the conservative approach is trying to do, is say, hey, kind of like the conservative approach of the Gospels is to try and say, these Gospels ain't so different. In fact, they're actually the same kind of voice, even if they're different people. They're pretty much saying the same thing. That's what they want to sell you. Whereas you all are in agreement, no, these are different voices, but our conclusions are a little different. I just want to emphasize that.
And it isn't I did a pretty radical title once with you that Matthew and Luke hate Mark, and it was partly clickbait, I admitted, but we talked about that.
Why are you telling
And I
us?
said, well, hate is like love less, according to a lot of people when they read the Gospels. Like, hate your mother, father, brother, sister. So they love him less. How about that? If you can relax with that. But what happens is the approach often is, well, but they have other information that they add, and aren't we glad that we have this additional material? Well, of course I'm glad, but I also want to read what the result of adding that material is, or taking something out that's really significant. Like a really good example, and I'm going to actually address this in the Q&A, but I won't answer it now. Mark says there'll be no sign given to this generation. No sign. Matthew says, except the sign of Jonah. Okay, if you put them together, you go, oh, well, I want all of it. And he obviously said there'll be no sign except, and poor Mark, he just didn't know the exception. And so he left it out. Okay, if you think that, then you're reading the Gospels in a certain way. I would encourage you, and I encourage my students, to be aware of that if you want to finally put them all together and get it all. But what you've got now is something you've created. And what if Mark is doing something with that no sign? And I think he is. It's when he literally turns on his heels and walks away from this particular group that is dogging him. And he never talks to them again until the last day of his life. And then he blows them away. And he basically says, I'm done. So Mark is making this point about who can hear and who has ears to hear, and people being blinded, and all that kind of stuff. So you got to read it carefully. But anyway, we're going to do this great Q&A. I wrote down a couple things. Son of Man is used 14 times in Mark. Son of God is used 3 times. But if you take out the first one, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, which many major manuscripts don't have, then it's 2 times. Wow. Now, I didn't emphasize this in the course, but people are going, well, if you say Mark thinks Jesus isn't God, he's the Son of God, right? But if you don't put it in verse 1, and it only occurs 2 other times, and I'm not going to tell you the other 2 times. I want you to think about it, because off your top of your head, you might come up with 1 or 2, but there are only 2. Now, that's notable. That is very notable. Now, you go count Matthew and Luke and where those occur, and you're going to see something emerging, okay? And if you mush it all together, guess what? You've lost Mark. See, I want to preserve Mark. And if you add to Mark or take from Mark, let's go to this old evangelical, you shall not add to or take from, right? That's right. In Deuteronomy 4, and it's at the end of the book of Revelation. So what do? They add to and take from. So all of a sudden, Mark is not Mark. So I'm the fundamentalist. Thank you. Because no, I'm not adding to or taking from. Please put that label on my head. Tabor just goes with the text. He doesn't fool around. I'm not trying to synthesize or harmonize.